I'm going to bring kind of a UK-European perspective to this, and I want to start, I suppose, with the issue of the Quad and this idea of connectivity. I mean, I'm very, very heartened to hear that all of a sudden people realize that all these things are connected, but it's always been the case. The problem is that many of the organizations and the structures, be it CENTCOMs or departments of states and foreign offices, ministries of defense, like to break things into desks and into regions, and you end up with a kind of stovepiped mentality that only has a number of specific nexus or nodes that actually allow you to come together and see the totality of the picture. What has happened with the invasion of the Ukraine is that it hasn't been the actual military, but it's been the economic and the greater outflowing of effects from that that have forced people to realize now, on the heels of the pandemic, which had started to also make us realize of our interdependence on one another for things, how intimate that relationship is. So, my point about the relationship between the events in the Ukraine and the Quad is that you will not be able to separate the two as long as there is no resolution there. China now holds the balance of power when it comes to being able to decide the peace for this outcome, I believe. It will now have to support Russia, and it has a vested interest in the support of Russia, and therefore, in many ways, like the German need to support the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a blank check, not a formal blank check, but certainly one has been cashed. And therefore, the Chinese now have a blessing and a curse. They have a great deal of control and leverage with the Russians, but at the same time, that comes with the counterbalancing condemnation for anyone associated with Russia. It also means that the Chinese will be able to do what many of us have talked about for years in the European security context, and this was particularly the case when the Royal Navy and the United Kingdom were working up the crews of the Queen Elizabeth Strike Group into this region last year, which is why in God's name are you going to the Indo-Pacific? You have enough problems at home. China will only take advantage of things in the Indo-Pacific if there is a Russian disturbance that allows a focus of America and the rest of the world to come to a European crisis. And lo and behold, we have that condition now. The other point I would make about relationship to the Quad and some of the expectations that the Quad will be able to do Quad things by itself is that you need to understand the centrality of the United States as a key enabler and a critical enabler, particularly about technologies and other assets to the operational and strategic levels, which are now being drained away quite heavily by the Ukrainian crisis. So again, you cannot disconnect both the operational and the strategic level from where the United States sits in both of those realms. Do not underestimate the weakness of Europe, I would argue, is also something that now, to the AUKUS, we have to turn, not just as a submarine purchasing exercise, but something that was seen as being an alignment between a major European state, a middle power in the Indo-Pacific region, in the Australians, and of course with the United States. The European states, by April or May of next year, when the main global recession begins to hit, are going to be politically in an extraordinarily difficult position if the unity of action has still actually remained in place. So that would be the time that I would argue that you need to bear in mind any kind of Chinese activity that would be able to draw on that kind of disconnect that's taking place in the European theater. And I think that's going to be the most dangerous time. And this is why Joe Biden and the European leaders are already working very hard to be able to put into place that kind of strategic unity that they hope will be able to see them through the winter of discontent. If you look at the number of countries, though, and this is the thing about thinking about things in blocks, blocks are made up of individual countries, each with their own problem, and the block chain is only as strong as its weakest block. And in the UK's condition, it is going to struggle to be able to do anything other than, do the kind of leadership role in the EU that it has done for years, and particularly work with the United States. So I think that in terms of that relationship between the European and the Indo-Pacific and the greater global condition, that when you look at the way in which the Quad is going to be able to operate going forward, I think there are a number of limitations that you need to expect. One intelligence sharing is probably the best way forward to expand the Five Eyes and let the Quad actually start to be a clearinghouse in the same way as EU membership was sort of a clearinghouse to NATO. Are you trustworthy? Can you come into this group and be somebody that can contribute and actually then bring some value for the value you're going to get out? And if the Quad kind of system and the Quad Plus can do that and bring in Japan and South Korea into that relationship, I think that would be enormously beneficial. Secondly, I think that the region needs to, and I don't mean this at all in an anti-American sense, and I say the same things to the Europeans, and I do it out of actually a concern for the United States in the difficult condition that it's in right now. And we've had it mentioned in a number of the different panels, is that its internal fragility cannot be taken for granted. And some of that internal fragility can be alleviated by taking some of the external pressures off of it. So stop relying on the United States to do everything for you. Stop looking to them to be the thing to look to in the first instance, and start to work with these other kinds of relationships and build them. Is that possible in a South Korean, Japanese context? Is it possible that the UK or other European countries will come out here? I don't say a NATO expansion to the Indo-Pacific, which would be completely irrational and actually counterproductive. But certainly in terms of other subgroups, and there, something like, again, the Quad can build as a basis of that. And certainly in terms of AUKUS and technology sharing. Technology sharing is a very, very sound and fundamental way, like intelligence sharing, for countries to be able to come together and collaborate and create trust. Because without trust, you have nothing. And you see that in terms of what the French position was at the end of the day with AUKUS. So strategically, you have basically a declaration of the blindingly obvious, that the UK and the Australians and the Americans would work together in a coordinated fashion to deal with Indo-Pacific security matters. At the operational level with AUKUS, you have what I think is a fundamental shift and a recognition of a reality, which is that aircraft carriers and their associated technology is, one, a game that most countries don't want to get into, and two, one with a limited shelf life. And that submarines are actually the capital ships for this region, given all the things that we've heard about the various domains, kill chain, blockchain, every other chain, and fears over the costs and of the escalation ladder when it comes to American aircraft carriers is very short. The strategic liability, risk liability is one. Lose one and everything moves up at an enormously fast and rapid rate. And therefore being able to keep them out of harm's way is not just, you know, a thing about money, it's a thing about being able to control that escalatory ladder process. And finally, do not get confused, I think, at the tactical level with just thinking about these kinds of things in a kinetic sense. Think about the totality of military power when it comes back to this technological issue. So AUKUS is really a way to keep American and particularly British submarine building capabilities in place. And if you look back historically, when you've lost the ability to create technologies, you have created strategic ambiguity, which is a term I really hate. And also it is an increase in terms of the risk factor. So not being able to sustain the capability of the SSN in this region over time is really a fundamental strategic investment, but it's also an industrial tactical level kind of issue. Can the Brits, with American technology, build something that eventually the Australians will build and may actually create a flow of some like-minded technological extensions here? Yes, and it'll happen. Does that mean that everybody has to buy into that? No. But it does mean that, for instance, if South Korea wishes to be a greater regional actor and play a larger role, one, it needs to recognize that it's a maritime power and get rid of the kind of army-led continental DMZ north-facing kind of mentality. And it needs to realize then that this comes with a different set of prices to pay, which is to change over some of its technological investment. You make a very good conventional submarine that would be of much value to many allies in the region, as well as deliver good fundamental defense for the rock itself. So why aren't you investing in making more of that? Because your army mentality doesn't see them as having that kind of value. It wants divisions and it wants assets that it understands. So I think the war in Europe has had an escalating and a rippling effect through the strategic, operational, and the tactical levels of many of these considerations as the region goes forward.